Welcome back, everyone. Today I want to talk a little bit about the central importance of escapism in the sort of operation of addiction, right? And escapism can be this sort of thing we do in response to many sort of things in life. Perhaps we find life boring, or the present moment boring, or we find it unbearable, and we want to find any sort of means of sort of escaping from that for a brief moment, perhaps. And addiction, it comes when our sort of escapism becomes chronic. It becomes sort of repeated. It becomes a sort of deep groove and pattern within our mind. We reflexively sort of reach for whatever that thing, whether it be a drug or video games or food, a kind of means of sort of having this sort of a brief transient pleasure, right? And escapism is not in and of itself a bad thing. But when escapism becomes your very pattern, your very mode of life, when your life is just a constant escape from the moment, you're not really living right. And, you know, when I reflect on my own sort of addictions and stuff, I think the seed of my addiction was planted in childhood with my own sort of relationship to video games, right? I used to play a lot of video games of all sort of different variety. And I've never really spoken much about video games in particular. I've focused perhaps on, you know, drugs and stuff like that, because that's been my sort of recent sort of, you know, experience of addiction. But as I've sort of done more and more shadow work and sort of unveiling the sort of the roots of my patterns, obviously often that shadow work takes us into childhood, because childhood is where we lay the very groundwork of our being. You know, that's where we're sort of learning and figuring out the world, and we're really laying down the foundations of who we become. And you know, a lot of my early childhood memories were, you know, not, you know, I have many different memories, but most of them relayed around video games. And video games, you know, they're perhaps the most powerful simulators of how we can escape from the world. And the very way that video games are designed, many of them, are to, you know, sort of seduce you into this world where there's sort of objectives and rewards and this sense of progression, like you're moving towards something. And particularly for me, who I have a very deep tendency to get really wrapped up in something that I find engaging and interesting, you know, video games for me have been sort of a very, you know, a big sinkhole of my energy and my attention. And, you know, as a child, you know, video games aren't in and of themselves bad. You can learn a lot through video games. You know, I learned a lot about the world from playing, you know, Skyrim or Minecraft or, you know, the Fable games. I used to play a lot of FIFA and more recently Football Manager a lot. And, you know, they're very interesting, very engaging. And I'm not one of those people who will say that video games are in and of themselves bad. But I've noticed for myself, you know, they have this very strong tendency to really take me into this hypnotic trance where, you know, where recently, for example, you know, I've been playing too much Football Manager on my little phone. I used to play a lot of Football Manager on the computer when I was back at home in the UK. But whilst I've been on my travels, I decided to pick it up a little bit again, and I thought, oh well, it's fine. It's one of those idle sort of games you can play whilst listening to a book or a podcast. And that's the rationalization that sort of motivated me to keep playing it. But then I was realizing that, I was not really processing or listening to much of my podcast or audiobooks, the productive part. My attention, my energy was more wrapped up in the game itself. And it got to a point where, you know, every passing moment I was thinking about, when can I get back to the game? And then when can I get back to the game? It began to have this sort of possession effect upon my mind. And as I reflect upon this in the moment, I noticed how I sort of slipped into those very old habits, those very old grooves, those grooves of just wanting to do something that is fun in this moment. And what always starts as moderation, for me, it always has a tendency to sort of spiral into something that is sort of detracting from the other aspects of my life. I wasn't being as sort of productive in my creative pursuits. I like to spend most of my time in sort of contemplation, but now, my eyes were sort of glued to the screen and it was giving me headaches and migraines and stuff. It wasn't healthy. And I had that sort of, eureka moment that I was sort of fallen into this sort of pattern yesterday. And, I made a sort of a strong decision to delete all those sort of games from my phone, obviously deleting all my progress and all that sort of stuff. But in making that sort of action, I was making a sort of a commitment to myself that I don't want to indulge in these patterns anymore, because I sort of come to this realization that they weren't serving me. They weren't providing me a sense of fun or relaxation. They became another one of my many sort of ways of escaping from boredom and stuff. And I guess this whole experience has sort of prompted me to sort of create this video to talk about it freely, because for you, the viewer, there may be some things that you do in this moment that sort of are a way of coping with boredom, something that is fun or interesting, but you have to sometimes you have to take a step back and you have to analyze, where is my energy being sort of channeled currently? And for me, as I reflect on the past few weeks and, months where I was sort of indulging a little bit in these sort of, little games and stuff like that, I noticed that a lot of my energy was being channeled in this fundamentally unproductive direction. It's okay to channel your energy into relaxation, but for me, like the video game itself, it wasn't relaxing. It was overstimulating me, and it was overstimulating me in a way that wasn't really growing my capacities. Rather than sort of meditating or doing yoga nidra or perhaps writing, my energy was going into managing Ipswich Town on my Football Manager phone. And whilst that is fun and engaging, it wasn't helping me in a deep level. And as we sort of mature and as we sort of evolve, we have to sort of look at all these sort of things that we're putting energy into, and really take a serious account of our days and the way we spend our days and where our attention is wrapped up. This is a central thing that I talk about, right? I talk about our attention and our energy and how to sort of move our energy in a way that is more harmonious with us, more harmonious with our well-being, our mental fortitude, our psychic intuition, all that sort of stuff. And, in order to stay sort of consistent with sort of this image or endorsement that I'm presenting on my channel, in order to stay consistent with that, I have to look at my own life and my own sort of patterns. And this little video game habit, it sort of crept in, it snuck in. And, but luckily now I've sort of, recognized it. And through recognition, through that act of awareness, we can then sort of transmute and squash that sort of pattern. And so, yeah, like I never advocate being perfect, this little habit or, old addiction that sort of crept into my life. It's obviously a sign that, I'm not in a state of perfection, and, that should be obvious. But even though we are imperfect, right, even though we are flawed, even though we have these sort of patterns that we want to change, we want to be better, the simple act that we are willing and, courageous enough to put an effort towards changing, even if it's not sort of bearing fruit currently, the simple act that you are trying is good. It is sufficient. And I think we should all be, appreciative of ourselves when we are sort of putting in steps to change, right? I felt very good about myself, right? I felt very, I wouldn't call it proud, but I felt grateful that, I had noticed this major sinkhole, because I was noticing myself becoming more restless. Like in particular, sort of looking at my phone for a long period of time, it was straining my eyes. It was giving me headaches. It was draining me of my energy. And I was thinking, why do I feel this way? Why do I feel this way? And when I sat and meditated upon it, obviously this thing came up. The many hours I was spending playing this game and straining myself and expending energy frivolously. But as soon as I recognized that, I noticed that I can't evolve unless I sort of slice this away. And this isn't to say that I will never play video games ever again, but my pursuit of consciousness does not allow these patterns of escape, right? These sinkholes of my energy. And so it had to go. And for many people, cutting off these escapist sort of patterns, these ways of coping, it can seem scary. But I assure you that on the other side of that, when you start advocating more for yourself and advocating for your higher self, only good things can flow from that. Yes, it's scary, but we have to have courage in this life if we want to move forward. And I think I'll leave that at that. Hope it's been interesting. Hope it's been insightful. And enjoy the rest of your day, everyone.